Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I'm Jason Wild West Inman.
And I am Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to your Mind University, because you have stumbled onto the podcast where we take one character, construct, time traveler, or cowboy from popular culture and teach you everything that you need to know about it in about an hour. And today we are talking about one of Jason Inman's favorite characters.
That's right. We're going to talk about the DC cowboy Jonah Hex, because he's going to ride straight into the second season of DC's Legends of Tomorrow. We saw him on season 1. He's coming back to season 2, and I am rootin' tootin' excited. So let's chat a little bit about Jonah Hex. This lesson, by the way, was suggested by a listener just like you.
Nice.
Listener Proven Villain suggested Jonah Hex. Of course, he's a villain, and of course, he suggested Jonah Hex.
And he's a Tumblr user. Yeah. You can tell by the name.
Let's move right into the first section of our podcast on Jonah Hex.
Which is, of course, the 10-cent origin, where Jason will very quickly teach us all the basic constructs, power sets, and everything that you need to know about Jonah Hex in case you go to a Wild West-themed cocktail party.
All right. It was, of course, Jonah Hex published by DC Comics. The first appearance of Jonah Hex was in All-Star Western number 10 in March of 1972.
Ooh.
He was created by John Albano and Tony DeZuniga. I might be saying that name wrong.
I believe you.
Tony DeZuniga.
Nice.
Okay. His full name is Jonah Woodson Hex, and his team affiliations, I think he has the best team affiliations of any character we've ever had on Geek History Lesson.
Wow, that's saying a lot.
All right. His teams are the Apache.
Okay.
The Navajo.
Oh, no.
The Confederate States of the Americas, the United States Army, the Kiowa, and the 5 warriors from Forever.
Well, he's definitely a man of his time period.
That's right. Notable aliases are the Mark of the Demon. That's it. Probably Ugly Face. That would be another one I'd put there. And his abilities are, he is an outstanding marksman. He has the ability to quick draw, which is a necessity, in the Wild West. He has the ability to gun down multiple enemies in one draw. He is in peak physical conditioning. He is extremely strong. He is an expert hand-to-hand combatant. I don't know if he's an expert hand-to-hand combatant, just that he can give you a tussle.
He could sock you right in the face.
Yep. And he is a master tracker, and something that many people probably don't know, a detective.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
He is a detective. He's a bounty hunter. He tracks down people.
Oh, so of course, yeah, your basic deduction skills would be very useful.
Let's move on into the Meet Cute.
The part of the podcast that we stole from romantic comedy writing, where we tell you the first time we met this character and how cute it was.
Ashley, I am very curious. Where did you first encounter Jonah Hex?
I'm pretty sure I first encountered Jonah Hex in some animated form, but honestly, the first place that I really have a strong recollection of who and or what Jonah Hex was after the movie came out.
The Josh Brolin movie.
Yeah.
We're going to briefly talk about it. It's, oh, man.
The only reason I really went to see the movie was because John Gallagher Jr. was in it, and
He's in that movie?
He is in that movie.
Let's clear this right now. Have you seen this movie?
I have seen this movie.
Okay. Listeners, I am a huge Jonah Hex fan. I've been wanting to do this episode for a very long time. We've been trying to figure out the perfect place to work it in. And him coming back to Legends Tomorrow just seemed like the perfect place. I turned off the Jonah Hex movie at 15 minutes.
It's not good.
It is terrible.
It is absolutely
terrible. I have never seen it all the way through.
And I will say that I think Josh Brolin is a decent casting choice.
I actually think he's a good choice.
He's not the problem with that movie.
No.
But I would not recommend checking it out. But so I saw the movie. The movie was terrible, and then I didn't revisit Jonah Hex until the New 52 series.
Did you read All-Star Western?
I did.
Nice.
And then since
Good
then,
book.
I've gone back and checked other things out subsequently, and I think Jonah Hex is a really interesting character, and I love him on Legends.
Nice.
So how about you? Where did you first meet the scary cowboy of the DC universe?
Well, we're going to kind of flip this a little bit, because remember, usually on Meet Cutes, my answer is always Wizard.
It is, yes.
And your answer is usually always Batman the Animated Series.
Oh, yeah, or Justice League, yes.
So first off, I want to just say that I kind of think I kind of was always aware of who Jonah Hex was just from reading comic books in the 90s, but I didn't quite nail on and solidify his character until he appeared in Batman the Animated Series.
Yes.
Now there is there's a very awesome episode called Showdown where it's about Ra's al Ghul and Batman, and there's these flashbacks to the Old West, and you see a very old gray-haired Jonah Hex fighting Duval, the son of Ra's al Ghul. Duval, by the way, voiced by Martin McDowell.
I didn't know that.
Yep, Star Trek Generations villain, the guy who killed Kirk.
Very cool.
And then, of course, Jonah Hex shows up again in Justice League and stuff like that. So, but seeing Jonah Hex in Batman the Animated Series was the first time where I was like, oh, that's who he is. And when I encountered him again in comic books, I was like, oh, that guy.
You were like, I like Westerns. Here's
Yep.
Cowboy.
There you go.
Nice. Very nice.
All right, so let's move into the main meat of the lesson, History 101.
Where Professor Jason is going to take us through the epic tales of Jonah Hex.
Now, saddle up on your horses, boys and girls. We're going to ride off into the publication history first.
See, I knew you'd have something else, Cowboy.
All right. Now, the character of Jonah Hex first appeared in a full-page in-house ad for All-Star Western number 10, which was actually published in various DC comic books dated November and December of 1971.
Okay.
That was actually his first appearance. His first full story appearance was published a few weeks later in Volume 2 of All-Star Western number 10, as I said before, which actually, very interestingly enough, was renamed Weird Western Tales in its 12th issues, 2 issues later.
Weird Western Tales, I think, is a much better title for a Jonah Hex-centric book.
Yeah, but I like All-Star Western because All-Star Western is very much a legacy title of DC Comics.
Classic DC title.
We have All-Star Batman right now. We've had All-Star Superman. All-Star Western is kind of this it's kind of like Crisis for DC. Like All-Star is kind of like one of these.
It's uniquely DC.
Yeah, Brave and the Bold is one, I would say. Stuff like that. Weird War Tales is one.
Yeah, definitely.
So Jonah Hex headlined the new title, Weird Western Tales, up until issue number 38, at which point another very famous Old West DC character, Scalp Hunter, took over the spotlight when Jonah Hex got his own self-titled series in 1977 called Jonah Hex.
Yay!
The series lasted for 92 issues with Michael Flesher as the main writer and Tony De Zuniga. I know I'm pronouncing that name wrong, and I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay.
I didn't get a chance to look up, see if he had an interview. I apologize. Who helped create Jonah Hex, did most of the art.
That's really cool that the original team went that long on it.
I'm going to call him Tony from now on because I don't want to keep disrespecting this great creator.
Our buddy Tony.
In a 2010 interview, Tony described the moment that he first conceived the image that would become Jonah Hex.
Cool.
This is what he said, and I quote, "When I went to my doctor, I saw this beautiful chart of the human anatomy. And I saw the anatomy of the figure was split in half, straight from head to toe. Half his skeleton was there, half his nerves and muscles. That's where I got the idea it wouldn't be too bad if his distortion would be half."
Interesting.
And that's where we get the iconic image of Jonah Hex's face, the big scar on his face, of course. And now on to the fictional history of Jonah Hex, Phyllis.
All right, let's jump back in time.
Okay, fictional history here. We're back in the Old West.
Okay.
Of the American Old West.
Okay, there's only the American Old West.
Now, I will throw out a caveat real quick.
Okay.
Not so much caveat that we have retcons and stuff like that, but Jonah Hex is a unique DC character. He's unique very much kind of like what John Constantine. Remember we talked about John Constantine, like we get to see his whole life? Since Jonah Hex is in the Old West, he is very connected to years and dates.
One of the only characters who can be, really.
Yes.
Interesting.
And also, we will get to learn the exact date and what happens at the death of Jonah Hex.
Cool.
He is one of the few DC characters that he has a set death.
To borrow a phrase from Doctor Who, his death is a fixed point in time.
It is a fixed point in time. And that, I think, makes him very unique compared to a lot of DC characters.
That's super cool.
Okay. Now, Jonah Hex was raised by his alcoholic father, Woodson Hex, hence his middle name. And Jonah was a regular victim of physical abuse. His dad beat him up a lot. His father eventually just stopped feeding him and ran out of money and sold Jonah into slavery with an Apache tribe at the age of 13 in the year of 1851.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. Now, the Apaches worked Jonah constantly until one day Jonah saved their chieftain from a puma. And with that act, he was welcomed as a fully fledged member of the tribe. Now, the chief took in Jonah as his own son, but his adopted brother, Notante, grew jealous of Jonah. Notante shared Jonah's affections for a young girl named White Fawn. So, Notante betrayed his brother during their manhood rite at the age of 16 and left Jonah for dead with their enemies, the Kiowa.
Oh, I remember them.
Now, Jonah was rescued by an army cavalry patrol, although they had to shoot him in the gut when he tries to stop the slaughter. So the army cavalry comes in, and they're just murdering the Kiowa. And Jonah tries to beat them up.
Because the Kiowa's family now.
And Jonah, as a character, is very ferocious. He won't stop. He's unrelenting. As a 16-year-old boy, he was the same way. And the only way that these army cavalry dudes could get this young Jonah boy to stop was to shoot him.
Right, of course.
Yep. Now, this is, of course, is going to be the first act, if you can't tell. Jonah Hex's life is a tough one.
Wild West, one would assume.
Yeah. Now, Jonah was left for dead a second time from this gunshot. But he was nursed back to health by an old trapper who'd found him in the woods. Now, Jonah returned to his original tribe's camp, and he found them long gone.
Aww.
Yep. Soon, Jonah grew in adulthood by himself. He joined the United States Army Cavalry as a cavalry scout, and by 1861... the United States was radically divided on the issues of slavery and states' rights, which would lead to what war, Ashley? I know you're a Canadian. I'm going to ask you about American history.
The American Civil War.
That is correct. The American Civil War, of course, erupted between the northern states and the South, and Jonah shifted his loyalties from the North Union Army to the newly formed Confederate Army. Of course, the Confederate Army, if you do not know, was the ones that wanted to keep slaves, and they wore gray uniforms.
Yes.
Yes, mainly the South, the southern states of the United States. Jonah earned a commission as lieutenant in the 4th Cavalry, and during this time, he met a fellow soldier named Jeb Turnbull, and the two became close friends. Now, if for any of you out there that have seen the Jonah Hex movie, like Ashley,
yes,
Turnbull should be a very familiar name to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, over the time, Jonah's conscience made it difficult for him to fight abolitionists, and he eventually decided to surrender to the Union Army at Fort Charlotte and wait out the war. Now, Jonah didn't have the best plan for this. He decided the best way to surrender was to sneak onto the base, sneak into the captain's quarters, and wake him up in the middle of the night and surrender.
That's so comic booky. I love that.
Yep. Now, the camp's captain pressured Jonah to reveal the location of his Confederate unit, but Jonah refused to yield the information. He refused to be a rat.
Exactly.
However, an orderly examined samples of clay from the iron shoes of Hex's horse and successfully determined whereabouts the Confederate soldiers were stationed.
That's some Sherlock level deduction there. Well done.
It's called tracking, Ashley.
I'm aware.
The Union soldiers tracked the enemy back to their camp, and they took them by surprise. And as the Confederate soldiers were arrested, the Union captain, who had been smarted by the fact that Jonah was able to penetrate their fort security, publicly thanked Jonah for his assistance in front of all the Confederate troops, making him a traitor in the eyes of his former Union.
Yeah, enemy number one.
Yep. Hex responded by brutally punching this captain in the face, and he was sentenced to solitary confinement.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, Jonah, in his solitary cell, found a shaft beneath his cell and used it to access the compound where Jeb Turnbull and the other Confederate soldiers were being held. And he convinced them to escape the prison with them. But the Union fort soldiers were prepared for them. Unbeknownst to Hex, the captain, who was still smarting from Hex sneaking into the camp, had deliberately dug an escape tunnel for them. And because the fort did not have enough food to support its soldiers, let alone the prisoners, so he manipulated Hex into staging a breakout so that the Union soldiers could just mow them all down in gunfire.
Wow.
And most of them were killed. This was an event in DC Comics history that is known as the Fort Charlotte Massacre. The Union soldiers shot down nearly every escapee in cold blood, including Jeb Turnbull.
Aww.
Jonah found himself a victim of a Union bullet as well, but managed to survive long enough to kill the camp's captain. The handful of survivors, unaware of the captain's treachery, though, blamed Jonah for the whole event and spread the word that Jonah Hex was a traitor. Following the Fort Charlotte Massacre, Jonah patched himself up and moved out to the Western Territories.
I do have to say that one of Jonah's most magical powers seems to be fighting off infection in the Old West before antibacterial soap.
Ashley, it's because he got the grit.
I guess so.
He's got the grit.
He just rubbed some dirt in it
to pull through.
I'm just super impressed because, like, you know, and The Revenant taught me that you can do that if you work hard enough.
That movie just could have been, The Revenant could have just been called Jonah Hex.
Totally. And Tom Hardy could have played the captain who betrayed him.
Yep, there you go.
Oh, man.
All right.
I have a whole new appreciation for that movie now.
In 1866, Jonah eventually found his old tribe's new village again.
No way.
Yep.
Good for him.
Jonah found out that Non Tante, the one who betrayed him, had since married White Fawn.
What a jerk.
And he declared Nontante's betrayal to his chieftain, the one who took him in as an adoptive son. But the accusations were denied, and it was decided that they would deliberate this through by the favorite Game of Thrones trial by combat.
Oh, good.
Yep.
And of course, Jonah's not like, I have a tall man who will assist me.
However, as we know, we can't trust Nontante. And Nontante sabotaged Jonah's tomahawk,
Of course.
forcing Jonah to cheat and pull out a knife that he had hidden on his body. For breaking the rules of combat and killing Nontante, which Jonah did with the knife, the chieftain declared that Jonah would be branded with the mark of the demon and exiled forever from the tribe under penalty of death should he ever return.
Wow.
The Braves took a red-hot, searing tomahawk and held it against Jonah Hex's face, giving him the famous scar that most comic book readers recognize. It's a pretty ugly scar too.
It's a really ugly scar.
Especially with the one piece of skin that goes over his mouth.
Oh, yeah. Which is funny because when you brought up the anatomy drawing, when you see the tendons that cover your face, I was like, oh, of course, that's where that piece comes from.
Now, of course, depending on the artist as well, depends on how insane or how tough that scar is, because in a lot of drawings it's against the whole half of his face, like he's sort of a two-face, because his
eyelid?
His eyelids have been burned off as well, and his eye looks weird. Like his eye is like kind of weird. But like in terms of Legends of Tomorrow, they didn't do anything with the eye. They just did the mouth. Same with Josh Brolin in the movie.
Yeah, it's funny because in the comics, I think the uglier the better. But on camera, I'm really glad that it's a pared down version of the Two-Face look.
Now, after this famous event, Jonah Hex was inspired to become a bounty hunter after murdering his first criminal, the outlaw Lucas Mad Dog McGill.
That's such a great Old West name.
Now, he gunned down Mad Dog while the man was beating his wife outside of a saloon.
Good job, Jonah Hex. Good job.
Well, don't thank Jonah Hex just yet, because Jonah Hex was so drunk that he thought the man was his father, hence the reason why he shot him.
That's fine. I'm fine with that. Good job, Jonah Hex.
The local deputy that saw this event insisted that even drunk, it was the fastest draw he had ever seen, and gave the massive bounty reward on McGill's head to Jonah. Jonah accepted the money. However, he scattered it on the ground, saying he didn't need it as he left the town by horseback.
Oh my God, he's such a dick. I love Jonah Hex.
That's some true grit. His first bounty poster was in 1866 with an old army buddy named Eddie Cantwell. The manhunter R.B. Stoneham stole Hex's reward by murdering Cantwell and then humiliated Jonah by taking his guns.
I love Old West names.
They're so good, right?
They're the best.
8 years later, Jonah and Eddie met again while Hex was bringing down the Jason Crowley gang, who he intended to take revenge on Stoneham, but instead found him wheelchair-ridden. And the two men went for a drink instead, had a good whiskey.
Oh, see, and that's to me a very sort of typical Western storytelling trope, but it's like, oh, that's a really nice moment. And Jonah Hex doesn't get a ton of humanizing moments, so I appreciate that.
Well, here's the thing about Jonah. Jonah is not a heartless bastard. Jonah has a sense of honor.
I would say he's passionate too.
Yes, and he's very much about right or wrong, even though he's like the ugliest cowboy out there. Which He looks like a monster, but he acts the best out of everybody. And that's kind of what a lot of Jonah Hex stories are. Jonah Hex is like the one do-gooder, whereas like the real monsters are like the pretty boys.
Yeah. Kind of like real life sometimes.
Now, Ashley, quick, Jonah Hex would next go on to meet a certain DC comic superhero. Do you have any guesses about who that would be?
I want to say Booster Gold, but I feel like you're tricking me into saying Booster Gold.
Well, I will say this out there because we're not going to cover it.
Okay.
In the All-Star Western, way down the line, in the New 52, Jonah does meet Booster Gold, and Jonah does come to modern-day Gotham. I'm not going to really talk about
but they
that.
They don't really go back in time.
Yeah, they don't really do. But there is a DC comic superhero who appears in the Old West. Who
Batman.
You are correct.
Yeah, I was like, if it's not Batman, I got nothing.
As a bounty hunter, Jonah Hex was hired by Vandal Savage. Who is Vandal Savage?
Vandal Savage is this really evil time traveler guy who you saw in the first season.
He's not a time traveler. He's an immortal.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you're right. He lives straight through time, and time travelers fight him.
Now, Jonah Hex was hired by Vandal Savage to eliminate a time-traveling Batman in return for some of Napoleon Bonaparte's gold. Now, Hex defeated Batman, but refused the gold, wanting to just keep Batman's Batarang as a souvenir.
That's cool.
And of course, Vandal Savage couldn't take his revenge because Batman vanished through time, because this was during the Return of the Bruce Wayne storyline.
Which is great.
Return of Batman.
Yep.
It is a great storyline. Jonah would have more adventures. While tracking down the Blackjack Horgus, Hex is ambushed by ex-Confederates sent by Quentin Turnbull to avenge the death of his son. His mentor, Hank Brewster, dies in the gunfight, and his first horse, the General, is killed by stray bullets during this fight.
Oh, that's really sad.
Yeah, and Jonah had a lot of affection for the General.
Yes. Yes. That's it's another cowboy trope, but it's really nice.
However, during this fight, Jonah was temporarily blinded from his injuries, but he's able to take down the entire gang without his sight just by hearing them.
He's just that good.
Yep. He also fights corrupt army officials when he takes down a greedy landowner, robbing pioneers and letting them die. And Turnbull, eventually after all these adventures, puts a price on Jonah Hex's head, which sends a lot of outlaws to come after Jonah Hex. Now, if you can't tell by now, a lot of Jonah Hex's adventures are kind of like one and dones.
Well, that's Westerns, though.
It's also bounty hunting.
Exactly.
We go after the guy, we get him, that's all we get. All right, now, just really quickly, I want to tell you about some other Jonah Wild West adventures.
Cool.
Very shortly, that I thought were interesting. Women's suffrage activists hire Jonah Hex to protect their rallies, and he agrees to defend them even though he doesn't support them.
What a dick. I was going to be really impressed for a minute, but I guess he's a man of the age.
He's a man of the age. Jonah Hex was also briefly hired by the U.S. Secret Service after he toppled an assassination conspiracy against President Ulysses S. Grant.
Wow, nice.
Yeah. Now, Jonah eventually decides to return to Virginia, to make peace with Jeb's father, Quentin Turnbull. But Quentin has him captured and puts him on trial with a jury of Fort Charlotte survivors. Hex tries to explain his innocence, but Turnbull, refuses to hear it, and they have Jonah condemned to death.
Dun, dun, dun.
Jonah, of course, escapes after a physical altercation with Quentin, but he is unable to clear his name. But soon, Jonah begins to encounter more people from the future.
Oh, yeah? Do I have to guess them?
No, you don't. I'm going to tell you about this person called the Lord of Time.
Okay.
All right. Now, the Lord of Time is this guy, and he assembles a team known as the 5 Warriors from Forever.
Oh, you mentioned them at the top of this episode.
When he believed, this Lord of Time, that his time machine, the Eternity Brain, would end all existence. This team included Jonah Hex alongside the Black Pirate, the Enemy Ace, Miss Liberty, and the Viking Prince.
So easily the most famous character
from certain time periods.
On the team.
Oh, yes, yeah. To make them powerful enough to fight the upcoming threat, they were each energized with a special force. Their purpose was to fight the Justice League and Justice Society to strengthen their resolve through defeat, which they actually succeeded in doing. They beat both the teams.
Wow.
Eventually, the 5 warriors rebelled against their master and assaulted the Palace of Eternity. And Jonah Hex, during this story, the reason why I bring it up, got into a fight with T-Rex.
That's awesome. And I can't wait for the 5 Warriors and 7 Soldiers of Victory crossover comic.
Now, of course, the 5 Warriors from Forever were eventually defeated, and each one of them were returned to their own times using the Cosmic Treadmill.
Man, I want to read that story where he fights a T-Rex. That's so cool.
Jonah Hex later encountered the Justice League by himself, with several other Western heroes, including Batlash, Cinnamon, and Scalp Hunter. Now, this story is what I believe to be the homage or the reference for the Bruce Timm Justice League animated series doing the same thing.
Yes, I think probably.
Now, the Lord of Time sends members of the League back to the 19th century in an absurd plot. It's really stupid. Plot to rule the world. Jonah meets an amnesiac Green Lantern in the desert and nurses him back to health. And and they team up with Elongated Man, the Flash, and Zatanna to take down some robotic gunfires while the League deals with an antimatter asteroid that threatens to destroy the Earth.
Sure.
In the present, Superman, of course, defeats the Time Lord, and that restores all the time travel wonkiness back to normal.
That's so comic booky and silly.
And then we get to the event known as Crisis on Infinite Earths. But before we get to that, we have The Crisis of Captain Terrific. Now, Listeners, we're going to take a little break out of Jonah Hex real quick. If you do not know, Ashley and I wrote a comic book story, and it's available this week. Actually, it was available last week, but it's still available this week. We have a story called Terrific in the If Anthology Superpowers by Alterna Comics. It's available on Amazon.com right now and in your comic book shop, but if you want a personalized signed copy from both of us, personalized to you, head on over to patreon.com/Jawiin, Jawiin, and pick one up directly from us. Our story is about a Superman-like character named Captain Terrific, who is basically, I would say, considering his reality. Now, the If Anthology Superpowers by Alterna Comics out now. If you want a personalized comic, head over to patreon.com/Jawiin. We're going to ship it right to you. Get it today and avoid your own crisis.
It's terrific.
Yeah, that's right. But we can't avoid the crisis of Jonah Hex. Back to the lesson now. The crisis on Infinite Earths, which even involved this old cowpoke named Jonah Hex.
Aww.
Ashley, what is the crisis on Infinite Earths?
There were so many Earths, and DC said, we need less Earths. So the Anti-Monitor did a thing, and then there was only one Earth.
That is correct. And as we now find out that it doesn't matter if you're a character of the past or the Old West, if you're a DC Comics character, the crisis on Infinite Earths hits you hard.
Great.
Now, Jonah Hex became involved in the first crisis when he was summoned along with several other heroes to fight the Anti-Monitor. Jonah Hex fought against the Shadow Demons alongside Batlash, Cyborg, Firebrand, Green Lantern, Johnny Thunder, Nighthawk, Simon, and Scalp Hunter.
Wow.
Alex Luthor and Harbinger gathered the heroes of several Earths together to discuss strategy, and Hex was present in the crowd to witness Pariah's warnings.
Ooh.
Now, I have the next question for you, Ashley.
Okay.
Was Jonah rebooted by Crisis on Infinite Earths? Because if you don't know, Crisis on Infinite Earths was a giant DC reboot. Everything that happened before was said it didn't happen. Superman started fresh. Batman started fresh. Wonder Woman started fresh. Did Jonah Hex get rebooted by Crisis on Infinite Earths?
I think given the fact that you're asking me, the answer is probably no. Or if not, yes, but only a little bit.
Yes, but only a little bit is the correct answer.
Yay!
So good job.
Good for me.
I had it written down as the answer is sort of, but not really.
Oh, so close enough.
Jonah, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, his personal story wasn't changed.
Okay.
But he was thrown into a new comic book called Hex.
Cool.
And get ready, because this book got kooky. All right.
Great. I'm so excited.
All right. In this series, Hex, Jonah Hex disappeared in a flash of light one night at a saloon in 1875.
Okay.
He was abducted from his own era by the villainous Reinhold Borsten.
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
Reinhold Borsten.
That's great.
Who transported him into a post-apocalyptic Seattle, Washington in the 21st century. Now,
well, I mean, I've been to Seattle recently, and it's like pretty nice.
It's pretty rough up there. I don't know if you've been there.
Okay.
All right.
Do they still have Green Arrow?
They don't. No. And no Starbucks anywhere. It's post-apocalyptic. All right. His intention was to use the time-traveling gunfighter Jonah Hex as a warrior, but instead, Jonah escaped and met a motorcycle gang named the Road Reapers.
Great.
They immediately took him in after he rescued their warrior Stiletta, and Jonah obtained a zone suit to protect himself from radiation by killing their cowardly leader Falcon in self-defense.
Falcon?
Yep. So this is Jonah Hex in the future in a Mad Max world.
This sounds terrible.
Oh, we're going to talk about all of it. Here you go.
Great.
He eventually learned that their warrior Stiletta was actually a robotic duplicate.
Of course.
Yeah, because everybody's robots in the future.
Yeah, just like now.
Later in Hex, Jonah becomes the shotgun man for a drug dealer named Barnaby Blossom. But when he discovers that Barnaby is getting kids hooked, he kills Barnaby immediately.
Good for him.
The real Stiletta, non-robotic Stiletta, tracks down Jonah Hex, and they're stranded in the desert together without water after a roadside ambush. They survive by walking 12 miles to an oasis and fighting off killer mutant whales.
What?
Excuse me, worms. That's even worse.
Killer mutant. Now we're in Dune for some reason. Awesome.
Yeah, killer mutant worms, because we have to riff off Doom.
Great.
Also, having attracted negative attention from the underworld conglomerate by knocking over their drug shipment, Jonah Hex and Stilletta are hunted down by a mercenary named Chain. But luckily, they defeat Chain in a junkyard.
Oh, good.
That seems appropriate, right?
It does. It does.
Jonah Hex gets new and improved guns after he wins at a dangerous live shooting gallery. But Stilletta is kidnapped while he's doing that.
Oh, no.
Jonah is then captured by a scientist named Dr. Adamant. But he escapes and destroys his society before Jonah can be turned into a robot, because that's what Dr. Adamant does. He turns you into robots.
I mean, everyone's a robot in the future.
Is this crazy? Has this gone crazy enough for you?
Oh, this is well beyond my wildest dreams.
Oh, it's getting worse. Here we go.
Great.
Briefly, Jonah Hex meets the Legion of Superheroes while they're...
I knew the Legion was going to show up. I knew it.
While they're traveling in their time bubble.
Great. Super great.
And also, New York City's leading crime syndicate, the Combine, sends Hex after their greatest enemy, the Batman.
I was hoping you were going to be like the mayor of
Nope,
New York.
who also exists in this.
Sure.
By framing Batman for Stilletta's murder. The two men fight each other and nearly kill each other until they realize that they're on the same side. And Jonah Hex helps Batman stop the Combine from unleashing giant killer robots on the populace, because it always comes back to robots.
Why couldn't it be giant killer robot bees or giant killer robot clowns?
Soon, though, in the finale of Hex, it is revealed that all the slave camps of the future are for building a machine to thwart an alien invasion from the Ziggs.
Okay.
Now, the Ziggs are spelled XXGGS.
Oh, that's so much. I was like, are they the enemy of the Zags?
No. Eventually, all the heroes of this future fight against the Ziggs for the future of humanity, and they succeed. But the person who Jonah also finds out that there's another time traveler there named Tara. And Tara, who's this time traveler, explains to Hex that he's unable to send Jonah back to the Old West.
Bummer.
However, in the finale of Hex, on Thanksgiving Day,
American Thanksgiving,
Wormsgiving Day, Jonah Hex.
That's so funny.
Jonah Hex. This is important. Let me finish here.
Wormsgiving.
This is profound. This is the one thing that the Hex series did right.
Okay.
On Wormsgiving Day, Jonah Hex gathers with Stilletta and remembers his family.
Aww.
They're in an amusement park, excuse me.
Okay.
And Jonah Hex finds his own stuffed corpse in the amusement park in the Old West section.
That's dark.
And he takes comfort in the knowledge that someday he will go home. That's what that means.
I guess that's kind of sweet.
It is sweet, and it's a profound ending. However,
worms show up.
It is never explained how Jonah Hex returns to the Old West. Because the next time we see Jonah Hex, he's just in the Old West.
Well, then that'll be a story that we'll have to tell whenever DC Comics calls.
And that was the end of Hex.
That's cool. The rest of it seems ridiculous.
Now, I will tell you that Hex is available on Comixology. And you may be asking yourself, Jason, is this going to be in your recommended reading?
Jason, is this going to be in your recommended reading?
Hell no.
Okay. Although if someone picks it up, I would love to know.
Only read that series if you just want to read insanity. Because that's what it is.
Cool.
It's not that great.
It seems pretty great.
Now let's get back to Jonah Hex in the West, where he belongs.
Yeah.
Now, Jonah, of course, he had a couple Vertigo series. And then in 2006, he got his greatest comic book series ever, written by Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti, called, you guessed it, Jonah Hex. Yep. Now, Gray and Palmiotti, they stated in various interviews that this series was going to be adventures from across the full length of Hex's life and career.
Cool. Very cool.
And the main artistic difference with this series is that this was a DC series published without the Comics Code Authority.
Dun, 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 dun.
Now, do you want to explain what the Comics Code Authority is, Ashley?
So when comic books started to become this big thing, there were a lot of concerns about the kind of content that was being published because, of course, there were a lot of children reading it. So the Comics Code Authority was established to police that. And they basically took a lot of fun things out of comics for a long time. And then there was a big push against that. And now we don't have it.
Yeah, around the late 90s, 2000s, basically Marvel and DC both just got rid of it.
Yeah, it was a really big deal when people stepped away from it because it had been a gold standard for a long long time.
Well, this was one of the first series to do that. And this allowed Jonah Hex to be very adult and very mature.
As he should be, I think.
And this wasn't a Vertigo book.
This was a main title DC book.
Yep.
Nice.
Now, some of the stories that were told in this series, because I don't want to tell you all of them, because I think this is a series that if you are a comic book fan, you should read. It is great.
Cool. It is an essential run.
Yes, it is. This is the essential run of Jonah Hex.
Nice.
So I don't want to tell you every single thing that happens, and I just want to tell you like some little beats of it.
Some highlights.
Okay. Now, of course, it starts off with a storyline called Face Full of Violence, which kicks off the series.
Okay.
Jonah Hex is hired to track down a kidnapped young boy by a wealthy family. Mm-hmm. He discovers that the boy has been turned into a warrior at a dog-fighting arena, and he punishes the ringleader by feeding him to his own dogs.
Ooh.
The boy is then revealed to have contracted rabies during this, and Jonah Hex is forced to mercy kill the boy before returning him to his family.
Wow, that's dark.
Now, right out of the gate,
that's really dark.
that is the first story in this. And I think the reason why Palmiotti and Gray chose to do that was to be like, this is the tone of stories we're telling.
Yeah, so get ready.
Mm-hmm. In another story, Hex murders an outlaw who was framing the Apaches, but is arrested when he learns that the local sheriff was the man's brother. They decide to have him killed, but he is rescued when he meets traveling gambler and other DC comic cowboy character, Bat Lash, for the first time. The two men team up to take on the law, and Hex brings the sheriff back to the Apaches so the Apaches can scalp him.
Oh.
This is Jonah Hex that doesn't mess around.
It sounds amazing. Like, actually amazing.
Mm-hmm. On Christmas, Jonah Hex attempts to take in a bounty hunter, but he is forced to fight off other men seeking revenge against the criminal. The resulting gunfight leads to the death of a dozen men and a building burning down, and his bounty escapes justice. But 10 years later, Jonah Hex surprises him on a train and blows him away with a Gatling gun.
Awesome.
Yep, so Jonah Hex doesn't forget.
See, that would be a great, like, opening story for a Jonah Hex movie.
Jonah Hex also in this volume stops off in the town of Salvation, Texas, which should be very familiar to any watchers of Legends of Tomorrow, where he meets a local gang that is holed up and disguised themselves as nuns. One of their nuns is a former lover, and their matriarchal leader has them both burned at the stake.
Woof.
Hex manages to escape during an Apache raid, and their leader is killed, but the woman he loves dies in the process.
I feel like if you love Jonah Hex, you're going to die.
You will die, yes.
Like, just like a cowboy.
Also, there's another storyline called Guns of Vengeance during this, which I really like.
Nice.
And Jonah Hex slaughters a town run by oil barons in it to avenge a friend for the death of her husband on their wedding day. Also, during this, he is forced to lynch one of his own friends for having raped and murdered a young girl after the man lied to get Jonah's protection.
Oof.
He also rescues a small Mormon population from extinction when a bigoted store owner places bounties on every man, woman, and child in the Mormon camp.
What I appreciate about this is that he's doing all these heroic things for different groups of people, but he's not focusing on only a specific group. Like, he's protecting Mormons and Christians and girls and boys, and like, that's really cool.
Jonah Hex only cares about good and bad.
Yeah.
He doesn't care what you look like. He doesn't care what you believe. Even if he doesn't believe it.
Well, like with the suffragettes, yeah.
Yes. If it's right or wrong, he's going to do it. Or if you pay him, he's going to do it.
Yeah.
But if he finds out you're wrong,
he will murderize you.
He will murder you.
Yeah.
He does not care. Now, again, that was just a very, very, very brief overview of that series because you need to read it because it is the best Jonah Hex series ever published.
Nice.
It's 70 issues. It's amazing.
You heard it here first from Professor Jason.
Now, of course, what we also learned in that series and in previous Jonah Hex adventures, as I said earlier, is the death of Jonah Hex. But let me tell you a little bit about his series in the New 52 before we tell you about the death of Jonah Hex, because the death of Jonah Hex is kind of the final Jonah Hex.
Sure.
And he had more adventures in the New 52. But real quick, Ashley, what is the DC New 52?
So in 2011, DC was like, oh, there's so many things going on. We're going to do a hard reboot. Pretty much everyone, all your big characters have only been heroes for about 5 years. Batman's been Batman for 5 years. Superman's been Superman for 5 years. They all get new costumes, and there's only Earth 1 and Earth 2.
No, incorrect on that last part.
Oh.
Completely incorrect on that last part. The multiverse has nothing to do with the New 52. It is all about they put their line out of 52 titles, and they decided to reboot. And, of course, it was also created by Flashpoint.
Oh, yes.
This was the universe created by Flashpoint. Nothing to do with the multiverse. All right. Now, with the reboot of the DC Comics line in the New 52, Jonah Hex Volume 2 was canceled, and Jonah was transitioned as the lead story in All-Star Western Volume 3, published in November of 2011. Now, while Jonah Hex Volume 2 consisted of standalone stories, All-Star Western was kind of an ongoing story arc that found Jonah in Gotham City during the 1880s. Now, this was also a little bit of an attempt to connect the Jonah Hex series into current DC continuity. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about this. During the 1880s, Amadeus Arkham was recruited by Detective Lofton of the Gotham City Police Department to help solve the case of the Gotham Butcher. Police Chief John Cromwell didn't take kindly to Arkham's theories, nor to the eventual recruitment of Arkham by the bounty hunter Jonah Hex, who had recently come to town. Even so, recognizing Jonah Hex's street smarts, Arkham suggested the two of them join forces to perform an investigation, and together they uncovered Gotham City's sect of the Religion of Crime, also a big DC Comics modern day thing.
Definitely.
And its relation to the Butcher series. Now, this series was eventually canceled in issue 34, but it did have a lot of cameos. Booster Gold was in the series. Jonah Hex traveled to the future.
It's awesome.
And the Court of Owls showed up.
But the Court of Owls, I will say, do show up in a lot of New 52 stuff. They weren't specific to this series.
Yes. And now on to the Death of Jonah Hex.
I'm ready.
Which like I said, it's very fascinating because we don't really get to talk about character deaths that are permanent.
Right, character deaths that matter because everyone just comes back to life after a couple of years.
No, actually, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
You've heard a lot of things. I just told you that Jonah Hex lives up into the 1880s. He was 13 in 1851. How old do you think Jonah Hex is when he dies?
I mean, the math scans out to be like, I don't know, 40 or 50, depending on exactly when he was born.
You're pretty close. But
But if there's some time travel nonsense in there.
Time travel doesn't affect his age in this case. But you ignore Hex, even though he was probably in the future Hex for like 10 years.
I don't know, 50-ish.
He's 66 when he dies.
Okay, so I was
He gets
close.
gray hair. He lives to be an old man.
Well, that's nice, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, 60 for the Old West is like a really old man.
Jonah Hex actually never stops being a bounty hunter.
Really?
And he's still a bounty hunter when he's 66 in the year of 1904. Jonah Hex sees the 20th century.
He makes it to the modern age.
Yeah. In 1904, he is married to a Native American woman named Tallbird.
Good. I like that.
The entertainer L.B. Farnham approaches him to become part of his Wild West review show. But Jonah Hex angrily refuses to let them turn him into a sideshow. Jonah Hex's last bounty was a gang run by bank robber George Barrow. Now, Jonah Hex succeeded in wiping the gang out, but however, when he wiped the gang out, George Barrow was not there. So George Barrow was able to get away.
Okay.
Jonah Hex, to celebrate his bounty, was playing cards in a Cheyenne saloon when Hex was murdered by Barrow's double-barreled shotgun while fumbling to put on his spectacles to read his cards.
Aw, that's really sad.
His death was immediately avenged by lawman Hank Crawford, who gunned down Barrow in cold blood. In his dying moments, Jonah Hex hallucinates and relives the life that he's lived and sees his partners and his former lovers and all sort of the adventures he's had. And he kind of sees his life as this great adventure.
That's nice, but it's that whole life flashing before your eyes kind of thing.
One of his final words is that it's cold in here. Yes. Now, of course, in the classic Jonah Hex series, they show you this death. In the what I consider to be the definitive Jonah Hex series, the final issue of that series, Jonah Hex number 70, retells his death, and you get to see what Jonah sees as he relives his life.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
It's a really, really good, awesome issue. So, and that's how Jonah Hex dies.
That's sweet and sad, which I feel like is appropriate.
But I think in cold blood in the Old West, also by the way, it's very similar to the death of Wild Bill Hickok.
And you think that might have been
real life character?
What was inspired?
Wild Bill Hickok, who was killed because the other person playing across him thought he was cheating at cards.
I didn't know that.
Yep. Now, very quickly, I want to tell you about this little thing.
Okay.
Jonah does have a son.
Does he?
His name is Jason Hex.
His name is Jason.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jason also lived on to have a son named Woodson Hex II.
Okay.
So just to put it out there, the Hex line lives on.
Past Jonah.
Past Jonah. And even there could be a Hex in the modern DC Comics world.
You know, I'm kind of surprised that there isn't.
Mm-hmm. Like imagine
there will be.
Imagine a Detective Hex in the Gotham City Police Department.
That'd be great.
Yep. And Batman knowing exactly who he is.
Or if he was if he lived in Metropolis and he was like a fiction writer and he wrote westerns.
There you go.
That'd be so cool.
Now you may think, Ashley, that this main character, Jonah Hex, is dead, and that's very sad that he died.
That's what I think.
It's not over. Jonah Hex was reanimated during Blackest Night as a zombie member of the Black Lantern Corps.
Of course he was.
He was wielding a power ring. He returned to play Quentin Turnbull's descendant, Joshua Turnbull. Joshua attacked Hex with a rocket launcher but failed to destroy him. And the young man pleaded for his life to the zombie versions of Jonah Hex and his great-grandfather, Quentin Turnbull, but his ancestor gunned him down in cold blood.
Awesome.
Every zombie, of course, was restored to normal when Hal Jordan defeated Necron and Jonah Hex went to rest. Mm-hmm. And that's it for the comic books.
Nice.
Really quickly, Jonah, as I said, has appeared on Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, Batman Brave and the Bold, and in a terrible movie called Jonah Hex, where he's played by Josh Brolin, where they gave Jonah Hex this terrible power where he could bring the dead back to life.
Yep.
It's terrible. It has Megan Fox in it and a very young Michael Fassbender.
Don't watch it.
Jonah Hex also has appeared in the live-action CW series Legends of Tomorrow, portrayed by Jonathan Sheck. He debuted in the 11th episode of Season 1 titled The Magnificent Eight. And that episode, of course, took in the Wild West, where it was revealed that him and Rip Hunter were friends, and the Rip Hunter's duster was Jonah Hex's old duster. Mm-hmm. And Jonah Hex is going to be showing up in Season 2, which I'm very excited about.
Me too.
And I'd be so excited if he just became a permanent member of the team.
Yes.
All right, so that's it for the lesson on Jonah Hex. Let's move on into recommended reading,
where Professor Jason is going to recommend some stuff that you read if you like Jonah Hex.
Okay. Don't forget, guys, you can go to geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading, and you can pick up all these books we say. We have little widgets there. You click on them, take them right to Amazon. You can pick up all the books that I'm going to recommend.
We have our full episode list all the way back to episode 0 up there.
That is right. Wow, episode 0. Very comic book-y of us.
Yeah.
All right. The first one is, the first volume is Face Full of Violence, which, as I told you as before, is the volume that kicks off the Jimmy Palmiotti, Justin Gray, Jonah Hex series. It is the definite series. It's mature. It's hard-edged. One of the best Jonah Hex stories of all time. Then my next pick is Bury Me in Hell, which collects the final arc of the Jimmy Palmiotti, Justin Gray series, and has that flashback of Jonah Hex's death in the final issue. That's the reason why. Also, the thing about Jonah Hex, you can kind of read that series and it's very standalone, out of order, and doesn't really matter.
Like episodic television.
Exactly. It's up to you. And then lastly is All-Star Western Volume 1. This is the New 52 series, where it's Jonah Hex in Gotham, fighting the Court of Owls, fighting the Gotham Butcher, fighting the Religion of Crime. And it's very interesting to see his relation with Amadeus Arkham, who, of course, founds Arkham Asylum.
It's a really cool series.
It's very fun. All right, let's move on into the final part of the Geek History Lesson podcast, the teaching tweet. Where
in 140 characters or less, Professor Jason is going to sum up everything about Jonah Hex.
Jonah Hex, the man with the ugly face. But he'll kick your ass for a few dollars more, because he ain't no High Plains drifter.
The man with the ugly face just made me think of the girl with the dragon tattoo.
Oh, well, I put some, did you not catch all the for a few dollars more in the High Plains drifter?
I did.
That's very good. All right. And that's it. But if you want the conversation to continue, then head on over to patreon.com/Jawiin and donate to listen to GHL Extra, our Patreon exclusive podcast, where we're actually going to chat about the connection between superheroes and Westerns.
Ooh.
And if that's not enough, you can always find our new episodes next week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and now Google Play and Player FM. And guys, when you're over on iTunes, please leave us a review, because we'll read them on the air, like this review from KPNY Sports. They said about Geek History Lesson, it's so good. I actually joined Patreon to help out. You can tell they're having a lot of fun and doing it to keep it up, you guys. Super happy I won the lotto for my ears.
Aw, that's so nice.
Yeah, so head on over to iTunes and give us a review because it helps other listeners find this podcast just like you, and we'll read your review on the air. So, Ashley, if they want to suggest future episodes of Geek History Lesson, just like Proven Villain, who suggested Jonah Hex, where can they do that?
They can do that at geekhistorylesson.com or facebook.com/geekhistorylesson. There is a plethora of ways to contact us in both of those places.
That's right. You can follow me on Twitter at Jawiin, Jawiin. You can follow Ashley on Twitter at Ashley V. Robinson. And guys, don't forget to follow all our exploits over at youtube.com/Jawiin, where we have all kinds of nerdy videos talking about nerdy stuff, nerdy things, watching trailers, doing things, books, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
All over there. All right, for this Geek History Lesson from the Wild West, I'm Jason Wild West Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson, and Professor Jason, would you please dismiss this cowboy class?
Well, partners, the sun's setting low, so it's time to head on into bed. But don't forget, sleep with the gun under your head, just in case the Indians come after you or the rattlesnakes come to biting. Y'all have safe dreams, you hear?